So feet about hip width apart. Just find yourself a comfortable position, standing, and I'm going to come forward a bit actually. Otherwise I'm going to hit the wall. So just let your hips sink. Weight slightly forwards. This hopefully increasing the need for familiar posture and everything associated with it. Letting your attention come into your body. You breathe in perhaps, the rhythm of the movement, whatever else is prominent to you, but gradually focusing. So I used this example several times last week and this week, standing on the hill, looking out over the valley. The risk of taking that too far. What we do is that's the starting position, and it's like we look out over the valley and think, oh, that's where I want to go, and you begin to focus on specific details without losing the overall picture. And it's important in Tai Chi to realize what those details are. This comes down to a very small number of basic principles in the first instance. The alignment of your body with the pull of gravity, and hence the positioning of your weight in your feet, the sinking of your center of gravity, the rooting down. These are the foundations. If you were building a house, the first thing you do is put the foundations down, and then thinking about how the walls stack up, as it were, trying to feel the sense that your shoulders and your hips are maintaining the connection, not strained, and aware of what I sometimes describe as a column-like feeling going up through the middle of your body. And I've drawn your attention in the past to things like this stronger quality in your legs and your feet, and this denser quality in the center of your body. If you imagine that in the first instance as a column, and you're turning around that column. One of the images sometimes used, which is quite nice, is that it's like a weather vane just blowing in a breeze. So if you've got that support from inside, then the slightest sort of touch on your shoulder, you can almost imagine being outside and a slight breeze touches your shoulder and you respond. So there's a light quality to the movement. You can't sustain that without good posture. And you certainly hard to do if you're carrying a lot of weight on your shoulders or something like that. That's quite difficult. It's another example of these curious connections that we make in Tai Chi between opposites, upper and lower, inner and outer, in breath and out breath, and this kind of like combination of something that is quite dense. I'm using the term dense rather than heavy, and something that is quite fluid and quite light. This is why water is used as a very common example of something that we move through, something that we move like. Because water has that density, but also the fluidity. And we see that sometimes in other animals. We see it in cats sometimes, we see it in all sorts of animals. You see it sometimes in athletes, sports people and dancers as well. And then just raising your arms a little. As I said before, Mostly our hands are slightly in front, so when I turn, it's here. But if you're okay in your shoulder, be careful with this. You could just allow the momentum to sort of throw the arm back and get this opening there. Just be careful of your upper back if you do that. It's quite nice. It just gives you that little bit of a stretch on the inside of the shoulder. And then standing. Just rocking your weight forwards and backwards. So this alignment of your body starts with an awareness of where you can let your weight settle so that the pull of gravity starts to pull down through your body. It's not the last thing, because everything else has to come into line. But if you don't get the base right, I don't know if you've ever, sometimes if you're stacking up something, maybe you're having a tidy up, and you're stacking books up and so on and so forth, and you put them down on the floor, you didn't realize that the book at the bottom was half on and half off something else that was on the floor, so it was slightly tilted. The first few books you don't notice, then you go and put more books on, and suddenly the whole lot topples over, because it's a barely noticeable sort of incline in the base. In the same way that all our movements start with something quite big, something quite small, and magnify outwards. The problem there is that the little problems in posture can also magnify out. So being a little bit out in your feet, or where your weight is in your feet, or where your hips are, can lead to quite significant changes further up your body. So one thing to consider here is that I would say, for me, after I've been doing Tai Chi, I don't know, best part of 40 years, well, yeah, getting on for that. And I would say that when I get something wrong, something like 80% of the time, the issue starts in my feet, my root. 80% of the time. So if you get to a point with any of the exercises today where you're thinking, I can't get the arms right, sit back from that comment, that issue a little bit, and think, have I got the feet right? Have I got my weight in the correct place? Am I moving from my hips? Only after you've answered those questions is it actually valuable to go to what the arms are doing. So we're looking for that midpoint. So normally I've just said forwards and backwards. Just try going from side to side a little bit. And then we're going to combine these two movements. And to start off with, we're going to trace the outline of the feet. So now we're going around in the circle. I'm exaggerating this a little bit. And you might well find as you do this, that if you watch, my pelvis is moving and so on, that's perfectly acceptable for this exercise for the moment. And it is quite an interesting exercise in its own right because of that adjustment of the pelvis. So we're going to take this a little bit further. That will happen sometimes. It's always trial and error in these sort of movements. Go back the other way. And when you've done a few rounds this way, let the circle get smaller and smaller. So it becomes a spiral, and eventually you'll end up at the sort of point of equilibrium, the central point, wherever that happens to be for you. Then it will come to to a halt, like water spiraling down a plug hole. They're just coming to rest, and ideally you want to work towards being able to have that point just behind the ball of your foot. It may not be comfortable at the moment, so that encourages the hips to drop back and to feel that the crown of your head is on that same line going down laterally through the body. So a gradual refinement of the posture. But as I say, it may take a while for you to get there, but have that as a long-term goal, something to aim for in the future. And then just letting your hips drop back and push up. Even a simple movement like this is quite likely to throw you off slightly. This is normal. And if you think about something like riding a bike, you never ride a bike in a straight line for very long. There's always, you swerve to one side and then you swerve back. You're constantly kind of changing. So don't kind of try and hold yourself stick and I've got to be in this position, but rather just feel how the tendency of your body is to sink into that area just behind the ball of the foot and to push up from there, so that although you drift away from it, you get drawn back to it. Bring your hands around in front of your belly and pushing up and sinking. So that physical returning to the alignment, the equilibrium in your body is paralleled by the returning of your attention to a quieter, stiller space, as always. I would say that they're the same thing, just two different sides of the same thing, two different aspects of the same process. So whichever side you're approaching from, you're going to benefit the other. I always start with this exercise because it really helps to establish the root, the physical dropping of your center of gravity, and teaches us to maintain that even as we pull away from it. So when you push up, you're pushing up, you're not lifting yourself up, you're not raising your center of gravity. It's like if I was standing on an elastic band or piece of elastic, then it would stretch out a little bit. And that's what's happening in your body, it's extending and contracting. Now remember that fluidity of movement. Think about cats are a good example. Now sometimes, a cat will extend out fully through the length of its body very smoothly. Or, you might imagine something you've seen on television or something you've seen in real life, or some kind of animal, very graceful, very smooth, continual movement. And that's the kind of quality you want to try and invoke, imagine in your body. When we go into the wild goose, then we feel that a little bit more in the arms as well, because if you watch my arms, again, I'll exaggerate to see how they come a bit closer. I'll do, keep going. I'll just show with one arm. So this is really exaggerated. It's not this. What's going to happen is this. Can you see there? Can you see the curve in my arm gradually coming out and then down? It's not that prominent, not that big, but that's the kind of feeling that you want to be getting. So I sink down, and as I push up, it's like there's an expansion there. You can see how that's put, if I expand there, it's like pushing my elbow out. And so the elbow starts, but very quickly drops down again. So this extension and the contraction is, you could almost imagine it going cell by cell through the body. Each cell, if you imagine a line from your foot to your fingertips, along that line there's, I don't know how many cells, I wouldn't even like to guess. If you imagine each cell expands, imagine the spaces between each cell expands, the total expansion is going to be quite big. So again, we have this idea of the small movements beginning to work more in harmony to produce the big movements. If the idea of imagining the cells in your body doesn't appeal, just like between your foot and your knee, and then between your knee and your hip, and so on and so forth. And then heart in the clouds. This lovely opening, dare I say, uplifting quality. Very clear, I think, with this exercise. Not having to strain. Not feeling that you're bound to moving a certain distance, but rather just aware. Again, if you imagine those lines through the body, nowhere along that line should feel strained. Whatever's happening in your legs is going to be quite strong. But you shouldn't feel that you're pulling anything out of line, that you're creating a tightening, a stiffening, it's like water all the way through your body. Now, dragon plucks the stars from the sky. The Chinese dragon is quite a different creature to the one we're used to in this part of the world. I say used to, you know what I mean? Which is quite, the Western dragon, the Welsh dragon, for instance, quite a bulky, fiery creature. The Eastern dragons in China and Japan, if you look in sort of the pictures and paintings of them, are much more sort of almost snake-like in some ways. Very fluid creatures, still very powerful. So that idea again of a kind of fluid extension all the way through the body is encouraged by the name and the image of this movement. One more on each side. Pushing in four directions really helps to focus our attention on the center of the body. It also shows again this rhythm of extension and contraction. You cannot have one without the other. and change, circling arms. And then it's comfortable adding the turn. And switch sides. Now rowing a boat in the middle of the lake. One more time. The upright position, let your weight drop down to 1 foot and hitting the ball in front of the shoulder. So now, again, I'm going to exaggerate, so my posture will go out a little bit, but it's a push from there, an extension through that side of the body. Well, I don't want you to reach out. I want you to feel that when you get to the furthest point, you could just rest there. But, oh, that's okay, I could just hang around here for a few minutes. If I'm right out there, that's not going to happen. I exaggerate the movement sometimes because, quite frankly, it's really hard to see what is going on under the surface in Tai Chi. Getting the ball in front of the shoulder. So with any of these movements, if you're studying a particular movement, then try it at different levels of movement, different ranges of movement. Try a big movement. And sometimes it won't feel right, but that's just as informative as getting it, getting it absolutely correct. Sometimes more so, because you think, well, why isn't that? What am I doing? What is being lost when I do this particular movement this way? So you can appreciate with this one the power behind the movement. You know, that fluidity of movement, that connection of movement really is a source of great power, strength. This is another one of those kind of slightly awkward paradoxes. It's very relaxed, very smooth, very fluid, but at the same time very strong. And one of the reasons I like this exercise is that the name suggests something quite strong, quite dynamic. You're hitting the ball. What isn't always appreciated with this movement, I feel, is that it, like all the movements, there's a quality of a circle in there. And what we're going to do in a moment is we're going to change from this to wave hands like clouds. And that's going to involve keeping your heel down and probably, in my case, certainly straightening my feet up a little bit. But actually, apart from that, it will kind of start in the same way. So this time, just come back to the center, turn, let your hand follow the same route, but then come over the top. So I've got my feet quite right. This name suggests a very soft image, fluffy clouds floating through the sky. And myself included, lots of us have kind of built on that image in one way or another. So I was a little bit dismayed, a little bit embarrassed to find out from a reliable source that actually the name itself is a pun. Apparently, in Chinese, the spoken word for cloud, this would be in Mandarin, I think. So the spoken word for cloud and the spoken word for block, as in blocking a punch, sound very similar. So at some point, some wag decided to call this cloud hands or wave hands like clouds, as opposed to blocking hands. So I don't want to disappoint you too much. Interestingly, I think there is that kind of softness about it. But if you think about it, clouds are also quite powerful. If you get away from the fluffy cloud image and think about thunderheads and storm clouds, then there's quite a power there. I think in many ways it's a very fundamental movement. For those of you familiar with Tai Chi forms, actually it's quite interesting that from cloud hands, it's possible to go into quite a range of different postures. So it feels as though there's something very basic about what we're doing here, which is just tracing out the circle. And the weight is moving. Remember also there's two ways of doing it. If I come closer, I'll show you. You can either imagine holding the ball or the stick, so the palms of the hands constantly face each other, which is a good way of doing it if you're having trouble with sort of getting the hands to stay in the correct place. If you're past that stage, then see here, now there's that rotation coming out. I come across a kind of spiraling movement, which would indeed make it more like the blocking movement. You get that lovely rotation in the shoulder, which is the way that I generally like to do it these days. Either way, you need a strong focus of your attention in the center of your body so that your hands don't get too wayward. Now again, we're going to try to go from this to circling arms. So I'm going to turn around. It's difficult to see if I'm in the right place. So your weight is moving from side to side. Your arms are circling. So one aspect of the change is going to be that the weight will begin to come more into the middle. So you could do that. Now you don't have to move the weight here. Now this time I'm going to come around, turn a little bit further. And that should bring your right hand up. And now you can go into circling arm. For a few moments, for a few rounds, just close your eyes while you're doing this. So you're more dependent on an awareness of what is going on within your body, rather than trying to simply copy what I'm doing. It's a truism, I think, of doing classes online, that unless you've got your screen that you're viewing on in a perfect position, which is quite hard, then if you're always staring at the screen, you're probably not doing the movement correctly anyway, because you will be adjusting your head in an incorrect way. So your posture will be thrown out. This is circling arm here. The main direction, I suppose, the intent, if you like, is to push forwards. And we're going to make one more change, which is to bear play. And here, again, it's going to be a circular movement, but with a strong emphasis on the downward aspect. So this time, whichever hand is going forward, move into that leg and sink. Now that should have automatically changed the direction of your arm, somewhere between the physical sinking of the body and the intent, the idea that I've implanted that we're going to change from circling arms to bear play. Ideally would have just created that change for you. So a kind of mind-body partnership once again. And when we talk about intent in Tai Chi, I kind of feel that the body should be part of that. Sometimes we're encouraged to think of intent being just of the mind. We have an intent to do something and then we do it. Sometimes it feels to me as though intent kind of sits in that space where mind and body overlap. The bear play, fluid, again with that sort of connection of movement, but again, an image that also invokes a kind of strength and power there. Back to the center and just turn it. slowly to a halt. And remember that spiraling feeling of coming into your center that we did right at the start of the class. You may even want to do that a little bit again, but one way or another, just get a sense of being able to settle in mind and body. Weight slightly forwards, hips dropping back. You can see there, that line, as my arms hang. You can also imagine the line from the crown of my head to my ear, going all the way down to my ankle, more or less. You don't want to get too caught up in that. In, shake out. Good. That point just behind the ball of the foot is a useful one to aim for. It's not the only one, by the way. Other people use other ideas. I think your weight isn't physically always there, and in fact, strictly speaking, your weight is everywhere, isn't it? So I tend to think of it as being like the plug hole of a bath. You fill the bath up with water, you take the plug out, the water's everywhere, but eventually it's going to drain away through that point. So even when we're maybe doing a movement that's drawn us away from that for one reason or another, or like when we did the stepping, we're here, we step, well, my weight, it's my heel, and my weight's going to go forwards, but I sense that there's still a connection there. And as always, for me, this always involves some aspect of the mind as well, and in particular, this idea of stillness. And so I think both in terms of mind and body, we can think of that reference point of the bubbling well, which is the point just behind the ball of the foot on the midline of the foot. It's an acupuncture point. Think of it as being like a post that a boat is tied to. So the boat isn't held completely still. It's tied by a rope. The water's moving the boat around, and it drifts off and it gets pulled back. So we're constantly coming back to the bubbling well. There will always be circumstances where you find that your weight's back in your heel, for instance. In Tai Chi, we have this tradition of push hands, somebody trying to push you. You can't always guarantee the weight's going to be there. Sometimes I found myself, my weight's right back in my heel, in my back foot. Sometimes I just fall over when that happens. At other times, I can find that connection to the bubbling well, either in the back or the front foot. My teacher Carell seems to, I don't know, he has a, I don't know how he does it. It's like whenever I think I've got him, I haven't. He does have this ability to really make that connection, and it's fundamentally in his awareness that connection is first made. It's almost like he constructs a pathway in his mind from wherever he is to wherever he wants to be, and whatever I do after that is just helping him rather than pushing him over. So 1 foot forwards, and see if you can give yourself a little bit of time for that settling in. Think about where you're aiming for. So the front half of each foot, we're going to be more precise, that point behind the ball of each foot. But you're only getting about 60% of your weight forwards at the moment, maybe as much as 70% going back. So I'm not quite there. If I wanted to raise one of the feet, either front or back, I would have to move a little bit more of the weight. And I could do this. I could go right back here, and sometimes people would do this in Tai Chi. Now I've got almost 100% of the weight there, and I can just do that. But I prefer to do this in increments if I possibly can. So I go back, I raise my toes, and what happens is, as I raise my toes, this happens. I go back a little bit more, turn the front foot out. I go forward. As I raise my heel, again, I'll exaggerate. I go a little bit further into the foot. So downward movement predominantly. So this gradually builds the amount of weight going into the supporting leg. And one of the interesting things here is that we get used to say 60%. As soon as it goes up to 70%, quite often we find ourselves back in that old habit of tightening. So if I were to just go here and think, well, I'll pick up the back, well, maybe I'm there, maybe I'm not. But if I start with the heel, I'm giving my body that little bit of time to recognize what is going on and to adjust to that. And then finally, I get to 100% of the weight in the front foot as I bring the back foot in. And the foot definitely comes in and then back out. This too is a circular movement or part of a circle. My foot goes back and out and down. So it traces out a quarter of a circle. Coming in the same way and out. Now it's quite a shallow circle, so you don't always notice it. It's a bit more obvious, I think, when we go forwards. And shake out. So in some ways, it's about the arms circling. The leg that we're stepping with behaves a bit more like the arm. The one that we're standing on doesn't. And it's what in fitness is sometimes referred to as closed and open chain. Here, my right leg, the one I'm standing on, actually has pressure at both ends, a fixed point at both ends, my weight pushing down and the ground beneath it, whereas the left leg is only fixed at one point, so it can kind of move around a bit in theory. So slightly different feelings in the two legs. Now, start that process again on the other side. So one of the things that people often come to Tai Chi for is better balance. And one of the things that people say to me sometimes is, I find that difficult, I can't balance. And generally speaking, my response to that is good. It's not out of cruelty, but it's because I don't want you to think about balance. I want you to think about being rooted, being aligned, feeling that inner strength, and through all of that, being stable. If you go for a walk this afternoon and you walk past a tree, I hope the tree isn't balanced on the ground. Because if it is, then you could get very unlucky and a slight breeze will blow it over. The tree is rooted into the ground and so on and so forth. And so change the way you're thinking about this, and you begin to change the way you do the movements physically. Raising your toes and your heel. As much as possible, maintaining those basic qualities of rooting down and alignment as you're moving. And being prepared to give yourself the time, the space to really make sure that at each time you're on one leg, you're paying attention to that. Stepping in. Sometimes people say to me, I have trouble being aware of my feet. Not uncommon for all sorts of reasons. I don't really agree with them, actually. I have trouble thinking about my feet. So if there's any consolation, you're not the only one. It requires the effort to do it. But can you feel the weight in the sole of your foot? Repeating that over and over and over again. And then this time, take a couple of steps forwards. And then going back. Repetition, focusing on one thing for a long time is very much part and parcel of the Tai Chi tradition. I did a whole day with one of my teachers, an online seminar on Saturday. I think it's probably not an exaggeration to say that I've already done more different movements with you in the last 45 minutes than I did in the entire day with Corral. That brings its own challenges, its own mental discipline, because we always do want to rush on. But one of the very, if you're thinking you don't really get what I've just been saying about stepping and so on and so forth, it's great that you've recognized that. Really, what you want to do is to practice it. So if you're thinking, I haven't really got that, the next part of this of the sentence should be, I'm going to get up half an hour earlier tomorrow morning so I can do more of it. That's how I would be thinking. That would be my intent. That'll be right. I need to go away and I need to physically do more of this. Not talk about it, not think about it, but actually feel it until my feet start aching and so on and so forth. So it's very much the way that Tai Chi has built up. Now, we're familiar with all the movements like pigeon spreads its wings and so on and so forth. What we're going to do is we're going to put some of them into a little sequence. So it's going to look like this. I suggest you have your right foot forward so you can mirror my movements. So here, I'm going to start with this movement, my hands slightly behind my hips. I go forwards. And then I'm going to come back into fisherman castanet. Pushing away. And then repulsing the monkey. So I sink back, I leave my left hand, so your right hand out in front, and I turn and I push forwards to here. And I let the hands drop down. I come back. And fisherman castanet. Pushing a wave. And now, right hand's going to stay in one. Just looking at the right hand. But you don't go all the way with repulse the monkey. It's just a. So the same thing is happening all the way through your feet and your legs. Your weight is going forwards and settling. The weight is going back and settling. The variations come from hips, waist, and in the final movement, repulsing the monkey, or however you care to think about it, then there is a turn in the center of the body. One more round. Good, and then changing over. Do one more round. Good, and bring your feet back. Lovely. Bring your hands together. Tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. And one shoulder. On the other side. Onto your back. Your hips. Belly. And the upper part of your chest. Shake out. Good. Right. So embrace tiger, return to mountain as always. Finishing as we've begun and really emphasizing this central position. So again, let your hips sink down. Push up again, feel that expansion through the upper part of your body. But see if you can just recognize, even as you go up, the pull of gravity is still there. So the potential for the downward movement is still there. And even as you go down, the reverse is true. The potential for the upward movement is there. So we don't have to create anything. They're already there for us in these processes in the body. It's just a matter of making sure that neither becomes dominant, neither is overdone. We don't just sink into the ground, nor do we just float up in the air. But rather there's this harmony, this balance between the movements. So one reason for not thinking of balancing on one leg, but rather looking for stability, is because it leaves us open to explore ideas of balance in a very different concept. That balancing is a process of harmonizing, not just struggling to stay on one leg. One more time. And stand. Fantastic. Thank you very much, everybody. So we will be continuing our classes until